This is the Sixth Man Show, an Orlando Magic podcast, with your hosts, Luke Sylvia and Jonathan Osborne, covering all things Magic basketball. By fans, for fans. Go Magic. What's going on, Orlando Magic fans? You guys are back with the Sixth Man Show. Today is May 1st, 2023. Jonathan Osborne here. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Luke. Is it Benjamin? Sylvia? What's up?
It is Benjamin.
The full government.
Actually. The full government. Benjamin. Middle name. Man, we are, like you said, in May 1st. We are in the month of the lottery. So we are one step closer. It's another milestone. We're only a couple weeks out at this point, Jonathan.
15 days.
It's crazy because I feel like it's already felt like forever since the Magic season ended, and we've been counting down time till the lottery party, but we are finally in the month.
When I say 15 days, I start getting pretty nervous because there's a lot riding on this draft lottery. There is and there isn't, because we've had the conversation that ultimately we're fine if you just end up with a rotation player or two rotation players from this draft. You're doing okay because you have two guys, which is like the hardest part of everything. Like the Celtics, they don't go into a lottery, not to compare us directly to the Celtics, at least not yet, but they don't go into a draft thinking, oh, we have to hit number one. Like they're like, we have Jason Tatum, we have Jaylen Brown. We just need to put guys around those guys that are going to make them better versions of themselves. That being said, we hit number one, everything changes again. And I saw a take today on Twitter. I'm not going to point the person out by name or directly, but they were pretty much like, nah, I'm good on Wemby. I don't want somebody coming in and taking away Paolo's shine when he didn't even get treated correctly his first Rookie of the Year season, which 1% of me can appreciate that, because yes, Paolo Banchero was completely disrespected all season by the lack of coverage that he received. But you don't not add Victor Wembanyama to your team because of that. Ultimately, we're trying to win a championship. We're not trying to win Paolo MVPs or All-Star games or whatever. We're trying to win it all, right?
Yeah. I mean, the only angle that I get is if you were out on Wemby because you're if you think if essentially then three guys on the roster are what you hope them to be, you're going to run out of money. You're not going to be able to pay all these guys if they are as good as you think they're going to be. Now, the reality is maybe one of them isn't, right? Then you can work with it. But I still think it is silly to say you're out on Wemby for really any reason. It doesn't matter. You've seen what people are saying about him. Just give it a shot. Nobody is knocking you for taking him one. People, no one's going to give you a hard time if he doesn't pan out, because everybody's on board. So I just think that is pretty silly.
Going to switch it up a little bit, Luke, here, as we are absolutely in the off season. Brushing your teeth, cold water or hot water?
Cold
water. Thank you. I saw this as a debate, and I deal with this on a daily basis in my own household. Carmen is a hot water toothbrusher. And her logic is that it kills germs more effectively.
What are we, washing dishes?
My response is, you have any idea how hot that water has to be in order to kill germs on the bacteria in your mouth?
You're not putting that in your mouth.
Straight from the temperature. It has to be boiling hot. Your mouth cannot take how hot it would need to be for that to work that way.
The only thing I'm disappointed about in this situation, besides in Carmen, is that I didn't get to be a fly on the wall listening to this debate, because I know that you're a passionate person, and I know Carmen doesn't hesitate to roast. So I just know that conversation was incredible.
We have had this conversation for 11 years. We've been together 11 years. We've had this conversation at least once a year since we've been together. And there's nothing that I can do.
Are there more
of
her out there in the teeth brushing world? Are there more of her out there?
There are. The reason that I asked
Was it
this is
actually a
because
thing you saw?
I saw people debating it on Twitter yesterday, whether cold or hot water to brush your teeth. I'm like, what are we doing here? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Now, where Carmen also likes to bring this up is when it comes to washing dishes.
Yes.
She turns the water on as hot as humanly possible.
Yeah, Lauren does too.
My little delicate hands, like you talk about, you can't take the heat, get out of the water. I cannot wash dishes in the temperature that she does.
It works
But
out for
my
you.
argument is the soap is what is making it clean.
Right.
So I wash my dishes in cold water.
Mm-hmm. I do too. And Lauren thinks I'm an alien for it. So I'm gonna have to find out if Lauren has brushed her teeth with hot water. Maybe it's a whole thing.
Don't know. I figured I had to ask you that. Maybe we'll do one of these. I'm sure some people hate this, but
right.
It's the off season, folks. We're trying to entertain ourselves here. But folks, coming up, talking about the draft lottery, coming up on May 16th, it is a Tuesday night. We are again partnering with the Orlando Magic and Michelob Ultra to present this year's NBA Draft Lottery Watch Party. Again, May 16th, we're going to be at Wall Street Plaza in downtown Orlando starting at 7 o'clock. So not only are we going to be watching the NBA Draft Lottery together, we're also giving away a Paolo Banchero autographed basketball for free. We're just going to be giving out raffle tickets, and if your raffle ticket gets pulled, you go home with the ball. And then we're going to be recording a podcast live at one of the venues. I don't think that has been decided exactly, but there are quite a few establishments located at the Wall Street Plaza. One of those, we're going to be recording a podcast live after the NBA Draft Lottery, really to just recap and talk about what it means for the Magic. So again, May 16th at 7 o'clock, be at Wall Street Plaza for this year's NBA Draft Lottery Watch Party, Luke. It is going to be a blast. This week, Luke, we're going to talk about Jamal Mosley. We did the player grades, went through all of the forwards, the bigs, the guards. We're going to be talking about Coach Jamal Mosley this week and kind of evaluating his performance this year and just kind of looking at how he's grown in his 2 seasons with the Magic. Before we get to that, Luke, the Milwaukee Bucks lost to the Miami Heat in 6 games. After the game, Giannis, by a reporter doing his job, that I don't think it was a crazy question. I don't think it was like an inappropriate question or there was any malice behind it, asked Giannis if whether or not this season for the Milwaukee Bucks was a failure, being the number 1 seed in the East, being the favorite to win the title, and losing to the 8th seed. Giannis misses 2+ games with an injury in this series. But for them, again, to lose to the 8th seed, and he goes on this rant almost talking about how one team wins the title every year. It doesn't mean 29 other teams' seasons are failures and so on and so forth. And people seem kind of split on this issue. Maybe not 50-50, but you and I sort of agree on this. So what is your take on what Giannis said and then just kind of the response that we've seen to Giannis's comments?
Yeah, so the first thing is, he says, it's steps. There's, it's steps to success. Blah, 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 blah. I think, and very quickly, everybody will figure out where I stand. But the one thing on the front end, like at first I was like, oh, maybe a little bit of an unnecessary question by the reporter. Because but the only reason it was unnecessary is because I was like, oh, clearly the season's a failure. There's no need to ask this question. Like he's already down.
And it was
whatever.
5 games, not 6 games. That shows you how much I care about any basketball that's not the Orlando Magic.
But what I will say is that Giannis started out by saying, I don't know what the reporter's name was. It might have been Eric. I could be wrong. But for the sake of this, his name's Eric. He said, Eric, you asked me the same question last season. And after kind of listening to the question and the answer a few times, at first I was like, oh, it might be kind of unnecessary by the reporter. Then I was like, oh, he asked the question last year. Like, this is just a thing that he asks, right? Last year, the Bucks lose in the second round to the Boston Celtics, who were the 2 seed. The Bucks were the 3 seed. I don't think necessarily that's anything to really hang your head about. What I should have done is gone back and seen what Giannis said back last year, just to see. But um, I think absolutely the season is a failure. And while I think the answer from Giannis was good, it would have been a whole lot better coming from a player on the Atlanta Hawks, like, or someone that was not expected to get to even the second round. And Giannis gave this question as if he was the underdog, and it really irritated me. A lot of people want to talk about Giannis. He's this really good person, and he's super nice, and I just feel like that cannot mean that you are immune and to criticism. This was a stupid answer, in my opinion. On the surface, it makes sense, like I said, but coming from him, number one seed, they lose in 5 games. I don't care how much he played or not. It felt really dumb. It's an 8 seed team. You should be able to beat even with the time Giannis
which was
missed.
A play-in team, by the way.
Right. And to be fair, we watched them play against the Knicks. They win at Madison Square Garden game 1. But at the same time, man, I still don't like the answer at all. I just think that I don't know. People give him the benefit of the doubt because he's quote unquote nice, and it's just I just didn't like the answer at all.
So what I'll say is, by no means do I think it was like an inappropriate or not a fair question. Like, it's important to get a player's perspective on their season and whether or not it was a success or a failure, especially from day one when the expectation is that you're going to be competing for a championship. That's what fans want to know. Like, fans want to hear a player's perspective on the outcome of their season, right? And this is one of those things where I feel like there are elements of truth to what you're saying, even though kind of in totality, you're wrong about what you're saying. Like, yes, it is true that not every season is a failure if you don't win a title. Look no further than the Sacramento Kings, who we saw lose in 7 games today to the Golden State Warriors. Didn't make the playoffs for the first time made the playoffs for the first time in 17 years. And then you take one of the greatest teams of all time, the defending NBA champions, to the brink. If Harrison Barnes hits that shot earlier in the series, there's a good chance that the Kings close it out earlier than 7 games. Like, they were incredibly close to knocking them off. Look at the Orlando Magic, and people are joking about the Orlando Magic, unfortunately, with this. Like, 29 teams is not a failure, and the Orlando Magic are happy about that. I saw a tweet on Twitter about that today. But we have overwhelmingly said this season was a success for the Magic. You know for sure that you hit on the number 1 overall pick with Paolo Banchero. You have Franz Wagner. You came 3 games short. You're eliminated 3 games before the end of the season. You were really, really close to being able to make the play-in. For us, that is a success. However, when you are one of the betting favorites to win the championship and to come out of the Eastern Conference, you are the number 1 seed. Yes, I know Giannis missed, essentially 3 games in this series, but you're at home you're at home with a 16-point lead in the 4th quarter. And like the last 5 minutes of that game, they could not give Giannis the ball. He could not get rid of the ball quick enough. Last minute of that game, he almost throws the ball out of bounds because he didn't want to get fouled and have to go to the free throw line. Grayson Allen dribbles the ball out. They don't even get a shot off at the end of the game. Absolutely, the season is a failure. If to start the year, you're one of the betting favorites to win the title and you don't make it out of the first round.
Yeah.
The perspective that he gave is important, and I hope people take the good elements from that. But at the same time, you should be able to say, yes, this season was a failure.
Right. Or at least maybe you don't have to use the word failure even. Maybe you can just say that we came up short of our goal. Like, just something. Give me something taking accountability for and it doesn't even have to mean that it relates to him because of his injury, right? Like, regardless, the team as a whole, yes, the season was a failure because we did not get out of the first round against an 8-seeded team. And when I heard initially the response from him, I was like, maybe I'm being too harsh because I felt like it was overwhelmingly support for Giannis everywhere I looked. But then I went and I listened to our good old buddies at the Eurostep podcast, part of the Blue Wire family, and I felt much better because all of them were talking about this season's a failure, right? Like, good response on the surface, Giannis, but like this season, yes, it was a failure. So yeah, and I saw it on Twitter too from some of their hosts that are with Blue Wire, like reiterating that, and so yeah, it definitely a failure through and through.
There again, like there are good things to take from it, but let's not act like the point of sports is to win a championship. And when you are one of the perceived favorites to do that, like coming up as short as they did, if that was me, and part of me wants to give Giannis the benefit of the doubt because it is such a raw and like immediate reaction. Like they had just lost the series, so he's emotional, and you could tell by the way that he responded. He knows that he's getting overly emotional. He has to even like back himself up and say, "Look, I don't want to get personal," and then kind of takes a step back and articulates himself a bit better. And I love that Giannis has this element to him that it is about the bigger picture, and it is life isn't just about basketball, and he is such a positive influence and role model to a certain extent. But trying to tell me that the 1 seed losing to the 8 seed isn't an organizational failure and means you wasted a season, I can't buy that.
And the very last thing that I will add here is that the one thing I didn't like, and I don't know that wasn't a smart comparison from Giannis, or it wasn't a nice comparison. He flips it on the reporter almost immediately, talking about you don't get a raise. Is that a failure?
Yeah.
What are you working toward? I was like,
it's comparing apples to barbecue sauce.
Just like, completely showed me that like in the amount of time that Giannis has been in the NBA, he's lost sight on reality. There's just no world where that is a fair comparison. And especially like
it's hard to keep a sense of reality when you're making $45-50 million a year.
Yeah, and so I didn't like that. I didn't like a lot of it, but
in the moment, like listening to that in real time, I was like, that's not the same thing. That's not even remotely the same thing.
Yeah. So whatever, a little out of touch, and yeah, I would have liked a little bit more responsibility for at least the team as a whole. Like I said, even if he didn't take responsibility just for himself, but like, yes, we as a team failed anyway.
Yeah. All right, let's take a moment to talk about the folks that help make every single episode possible, our lovely patrons. So if you have not heard by now, we do have a Patreon community that you can join for as little as $2 a month. You can get access to awesome benefits like access to our Discord channel. We also have a monthly Zoom call with our Elite and Hall of Fame tier patrons where we just talk about the Orlando Magic and we have a good time and hanging out with them. So if you're ever curious or wanted to join our Patreon community, again, to help financially support the show, you can find us at patreon.com/the6man-show. And we shout out our Hall of Fame tier and Elite tier patrons on every episode. So we'll start with the Court Cousins. A big shout out to our boy Peach, who just got a job with the Dallas Stars, helping their facilities. I don't know if he's going to be driving the Zamboni at their practice facility, but I know he's done that at other facilities in the past. So a big shout out to Peach. Really, really happy for you, man. And then Drew Gooden, Armin, Carson Tulo, Normal, Magic Player History, Julio, Gabe Gaines, Wiffle, Michael Martin, Jamel Miller, Michael Salapong, The Distract, Donkey Punch Dave, It's Not Okay to Say Okiki, Pierre A, Migzors, Nostalgia, and M&M's, Dylan Holden, Mr. Mikey, Eduardo Sanchez, Drum, Danimal, Dutto15, Bobby Skinner, Goody93, Teddy Sylvia, Eric Lopez, Fuchsia, Juan Geraldo, Bill Fulton, Edmund, Lagone, Jose Esquilin, Destined for Greatness, Caleb Pete, Cannibalism, Time Mr. TV, Joe Rothfuss, ESPN Really Sucks, Gear 95 Shred, Junior Bruce, Half Rican, Shahin 177, Bulby the Don, Hemlo, Ban Himro, RM Prof 221, Ray Pastrana, Magic Kid 714, Let's Spank Don't Tank, Soft Taco, Jesse, Johnny B, Fuego Nando, Victor Cologne, Phantom Wolf 72, Irish Magic Mike, Austin Lampy, Random Hustle, Bobo. His first name is his last name, Only Franz, Maria. A big shout out to all of our patrons. You can find us at patreon.com/the6man show. let's talk about Jamal Mosley. So Jamal Mosley in his second season with the Orlando Magic, Luke. We all know the Magic went 34-48 on the season. Jamal Mosley in his 2 seasons with the Orlando Magic now has a 58-win, 112-loss record, good for win percentage of 34.1. Luke, before we start talking about the areas of growth that we've seen with Jamal Mosley, I want to take it back a couple of summers ago after the hire of Jamal Mosley, and just what were your initial thoughts of the hire of Jamal Mosley, and then what were your initial thoughts of Jamal like after that first press conference?
Yeah, I think for him, it's very difficult when you have an assistant coach. In general, anyone gets their first head coaching gig, it is very hard to gauge what you're supposed to think, what they're good at, what they're not good at, all that sort of thing. So I do think that it was huge. And I remember thinking this, obviously, as really everybody else did, and this is all we really knew, was that Jamal Mosley was good relationally with players. He had good relationships, he developed them, kept the team chemistry high, that sort of thing. And that was really the only thing that I knew of him, obviously, other than what we could read about him on Wikipedia or any other website. So I would say that was really the only thing that I knew about him. Expectation-wise, it felt like a very stereotypical, like, this team needs to rebuild. We need a guy that can build the chemistry, players coach, that sort of thing. First press conference, like you said, I just remember thinking he was slightly timid. That there was a little bit of maybe he's an introvert or he's not comfortable, all in ways that have kind of shifted over time for me in terms of opinion of him. But yeah, first impressions are hard, and that's really all that I remember about really the beginning of Jamal Mosley in Orlando.
I remember, it was like we had heard some like potential like Wes Unseld Jr. stuff. I know the Magic, had interviewed Darvin Ham, Jamal Mosley, obviously. So the initial hire, I was like, okay, like this is their guy. We were trusting in Jamal. We were not Jamal. We were trusting in John and Jeff. We weren't quite trusting Jamal yet. But my feelings after the first press conference, I had even texted you guys and I said I was getting like Jacques Vaughn vibes because Jacques Vaughn now has grown, as a head coach over the years now with the Brooklyn Nets, much, has grown into that role and is much more confident, but especially in Orlando, just didn't seem like he wanted anything to do with the head coaching job at the time. Just very, very unsure of himself, really seemed to lack confidence. And that was kind of the vibe that I got from Jamal Mosley. You could tell that he wasn't completely comfortable, speaking to the press and fielding those questions kind of on the fly. If you've never been in that role, it's a tough thing to do, fair enough. But that was the thing that had stuck out to me, that he's very much learning. We probably should have given him more of the benefit of the doubt. At least that's the way that I feel about the way I reacted to him initially. And historically, around the league, when you see these kind of inexperienced coaches get put into these roles with these rebuilding teams, usually you're hired to eventually get fired before we see the next guy come in, kind of take over, and then take the team to the next step. I don't want to have that conversation just yet. We will in a few minutes. But going back to last year and like the first season and sort like some of the good and like the bad that we saw from Jamal Mosley in year one of the positives, and this trend has continued, is, you spoke to this, his relationship with the players, the way that the whole roster last year and this year really bought into what the team is trying to do, what they're trying to build, and the fact that regardless if they play well night in and night out, they're going to fight like crazy. At some point, that run is coming from the Magic. We haven't always been able to say that, but the last couple of seasons with Jamal, doesn't matter if they're down 20 in the third quarter, that at some point they're going to cut this down to 12 or 11 or maybe even 9. Sometimes they come all the way back, but the Magic are going to make this at least somewhat of a game at some point. And a 22-win team last year, where a lot of young teams, maybe like the Houston Rockets or the Detroit Pistons, where they just looked pathetic at times. We never really saw that from the Magic last year. Now, negatively, you and I do feel like it was fair, we're questioning a lot of the rotations last year. We're questioning sort of like the X's and O's, what they were drawing up schematically and the adjustments that he was or was not making on the fly in the middle of these games, like you see some of the better coaches in the league do. Sometimes you draw up a game plan and throughout the game, something changes and you realize, hey, this isn't really working and you need to switch things up a bit. We did see a reluctancy from Jamal to do that, at least in year one. So, Luke, outside of kind of the things that I'm mentioning, what stood out to you from Jamal year one?
I think despite the rotation questions that were fair, he still did a really good thing and seemingly finding the best talent to propel the starting group. And this is something that has carried. Like this is a thing that he has. Like he specializes, in my opinion, in optimizing players in their role, like in terms of what groups work well together. And we'll get into it when we talk about year two and really how I can expand upon this. But there was a time where that starting five group was number one, and and just as a starting lineup, right? Like in the net
year, right?
rating, yes, in that rating, that was something he found. He stuck to it. He let them build chemistry, and that was a really great lineup.
And we thought
Say
the
what you
Bamba
want
thing
about
was a joke.
Yeah, when obviously for those that maybe don't remember or you need a refresher, he was playing Bamba and Wendell together, and we did think that was a joke. He rolled it out in preseason, and we were like, yeah, there's no way. And he rolls it out, and it ends up being one of the best lineups and the best lineup in the league for a while. So I just think that no matter what people think on the outside about, oh, this hasn't been done before, what is he doing? From the get-go, he has had this knack. And I do think it speaks volumes about him as a coach. So that was really my main takeaway from last season in the positive light for sure. And then negatively, it's everything you've already said when we're talking about rotations. His use of like his timeout utilization at times was not good, which I think he's grown. But that's kind of what I remember there as well from year one.
I also remember like the lineup stuff was bad, especially towards the beginning of the year, but maybe not his in-game adjustments, but his game-to-game adjustments last year, I felt like improved throughout the season. So just to give a little bit of added context to last season, so the Magic, 22-60 on the year. Prior to the All-Star break in 60 games, the Magic had a 21.7% win percentage. Post All-Star break in 22 games, the Magic had a 40.9% win percentage. So we've had multiple conversations on the show about how after the All-Star break last year, I believe they were 7th in the NBA in terms of defensive rating. That was massive. But the other, obviously getting Markelle Fultz back towards the end of last season was huge. But the fact that the Magic were so bad those first 60 games and they didn't just pack it in those last 22 games of the season. Right. You're terrible the first 60. You're slightly below good the last 22 games. Cannot give Jamal enough praise in that regard. And that starting lineup that we're talking about last year was Cole Anthony, Jalen Suggs, Franz Wagner, Wendell Carter Jr., and Mo Bamba. And through 884 possessions that they played together, they were minus 1.2 differential per 100 possessions played. So they weren't really that great. Like you said, to start the year last year, they were one of, if not the best starting lineup in the league in terms of net rating. So his willingness to try different combinations in the rotations, sometimes it was a bit more apparent to us, I feel like, that certain things weren't working, and he was kind of reluctant to get away from that. But as a starting coach, when you're really looking for something to work, you have to let the sample size kind of build. In his defense, you can't play 30 minutes of a lineup and it's not working, and maybe in your mind it's just taking time to gel. You have to have, like, what's the word that I'm looking for? Like, you have to have belief in what you're doing, as a head coach. You can't be wishy-washy. Guys are going to see right through that immediately. So now let's talk about kind of his growth from year 1 to year 2. It would be disingenuous of us not to point out the fact that the roster is much improved. That for the lack of health that we had this season, we had a lot more health than we did last year. Markelle Fultz playing most of the season, Gary Harris playing most of the season, Jonathan Isaac playing 11 games, and the team going 8-3 in that stretch. Jalen Suggs, a little bit healthier than last season, but not much. Cole Anthony, being healthy for basically the last 3 quarters of the season, and, not really suffering any, major injuries to any key players really throughout the rest of the season. So that's number one. But where do you think we saw the most growth for Jamal from year 1 to year 2?
I mean, just overarching from a broad viewpoint, the team wins 12 wins more. The plus 12, that's the biggest takeaway as a whole, as well as that really pairs with the health too. But I think just his ability to see things even further, like his ability to evaluate where a guy needs to be. He had the whole sample size of last season, and he's able to do those things. The biggest thing for me, and specifically, is Cole Anthony coming off the bench. Because you're at a point where you're like, oh, we need to develop guys. Winning's not really a priority, and you come into this season, and that is the case. Winning wasn't solely the priority. They're still having to balance this with developing talent. But I think that he saw that Cole Anthony was going to develop better off the bench than in the starting lineup. Because obviously at that point, you're making the decision between Gary Harris or Cole Anthony. Now, just in thinking about it, are you going to trust that Gary Harris can be the bench player that Cole Anthony was this year? In my opinion, absolutely not. Gary could not do what Cole did in the bench unit. But with that, Cole was able to develop. Cole honestly developed, I think, at a faster rate on more ways than by coming off the bench. And so that is something that I kind of looked into, was what were his numbers as a starter this year? What were his numbers off the bench? The biggest discrepancy, I would give it to everybody off the bat, is that he only played 4 games as a starter this year. But in looking at that, in a small sample size, he averaged 12.8 points per game, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, and he took 14 shots a game, 37.5% from the field, 23.8% from 3. So what all you need to know is that Cole Anthony, in the games that he started, was a lot of the Cole Anthony we saw last year. Then we see him come off the bench. In 56 games, Jonathan, he shoots 4 less field goal attempts a game, and he still averages more points off the bench than he did as a starter. Shoots 46.5% from the field, shoots 37.8% from 3, like a 14% increase. And then, like I said, there is a discrepancy. And the discrepancy is only 4 games as a starter. So what I did was I wanted to see, in that time, 4 games as a starter, and then not long after, 4 games off the bench, his first 4, what was the difference? And the difference was crazy. First 4 games off the bench, his stats were almost 17 points per game, 55% from the field, 61.5% from 3, almost, and still 10 field goal attempts a game, just like the rest off the bench performances. So to me, it really screamed that Jamal saw what he had right off the bat, and he's stuck with it. Cole essentially goes out due to injury, comes back off the bench, and doesn't see the starting lineup again until, I believe, April. So, I mean, I really had hats off to Jamal for that, and just having the foresight to see and saying, oh, there might be something here. He's more efficient off the bench. His role is different. he's able to take advantage of being the guy while not pulling anybody else down, and he's still able to operate. I just thought that was the most impressive part for me.
I do agree that was super impressive. For me, it's just kind of like the overall growth that we saw from Jamal. So one, like the continuation of him keeping the locker room together. Like everybody that we talk to when we talk about like why is this team so special? And we talked about this with Jeff Turner, a couple of weeks ago. Everybody talks about how this locker room is different. Why is it different? And Jeff could have said, oh, well, Cole Anthony's a great guy, really pulls everybody together, or Wendell's a great leader, or Mo Wagner is super vocal, or they have all these great guys in the locker room. And he said, it starts with Jamal Mosley.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, like, again, you were awful all last year. You come into the beginning of the season and you have guys at Media Day talking about making the 4th seed. You have the number 1 overall pick in the draft. And after 25 games, you're 5-20. Regardless of the context surrounding that, injuries or what have you, the fact to be sitting at 5-20 almost all the time, and we talked about this at random times throughout the year, like the Magic were probably the best team in NBA history to start 5-20. Like from that point on, they were one of the best teams that have ever done that in the history of the NBA. So history shows you that most of the time you do that, you are a long shot for the playoffs. And the Magic did not get eliminated until the 79th game of an 82-game season. So again, facing adversity and sort of like a different type of adversity to a certain extent, because the expectations were raised going into this season, for him to keep all of that together and then to see the way that the team exponentially improved as soon as they got healthy and really found a way to play, like I cannot say enough good things about the leader that Jamal Mosley is, especially for this roster. And we talk about it being young guys, but like it's young guys. There's some veterans in there. And all of the guys talk about Jamal the same way. And all of the guys talk about this roster and this locker room in the same way. You don't get this everywhere. Mo Wagner, who's been to the Lakers, to the Wizards, to the Celtics. He's been in a few locker rooms around the NBA. He's pointed out multiple times that this is not normal, what you're seeing here. Now, beyond that, we talked about the pre and post All-Star, numbers from last year. So in this season, 59 games pre All-Star break, the Magic were 24-35. Remember, they started 5-20. So they went, what is that? 19-15. The last, however many games before the All-Star break.
34. And
and then post All-Star break, the Magic in 23 games were 10-13, which is good for 43.5% win percentage. Now, yeah, the Magic kind of threw away the last couple of games to end the year. Maybe you could have picked up another couple of wins if everybody's playing, towards the end of the year there. But for the Magic to start 5-20 and to finish 34-48, hugely successful, just organizationally in its own right, but just the way that Jamal kind of kept everybody together. But we also, I felt like, now there were some shortcomings. Like we can talk about leaving, the corners wide open, kind of guys over helping and leaving, threes wide open seemingly all season long. If you look at the percentages, the Magic were one of the best teams in the league in terms of opponents' 3-point percentage. Even though it drove us crazy on some nights where teams were knocking down a lot of shots, I don't know if you want to call it luck. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's hard to argue with the numbers. Something that drove us crazy, but for the most part, the Magic did a pretty good job of defending the 3-point line if you just look at the way that their opponents shot from behind the arc. But on a schematic basis, in terms of like calling set plays, talking about like sideline out of bounds plays, after timeout plays, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Magic had multiple functioning point guards this season, which they did not have last season. Having Markelle Fultz, getting Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner those playmaking reps early in the season, maybe that's something that he had last year that he just didn't really feel comfortable going to. But the willingness to implement those. And I do think in the NBA, a lot of times we don't give assistant coaches enough credit. Is that someone, on the sideline that is assisting him? Being a head coach, you're seeing the whole, like you're running the entire show. you get all of the credit as a head coach, you get all of the blame. But part of being a good head coach is putting your staff in positions to win and putting your players in position to win. And even if he is delegating some of those responsibilities to someone else, the fact that he is aware enough to do that, I think that happens a lot more in the NBA than people realize, right? Like not every coach is probably the one sitting there drawing up every single, offensive set and so on and so forth. So his willingness and the ability to implement those and have success in doing so, I feel much better about the future outlook of Jamal Mosley now than I did maybe in the middle or even like the end of last year. And that's where I want to take the conversation next. Juxtapose like your current feeling about Jamal Mosley and like maybe his future outlook on this team to how he felt during that first press conference or maybe the middle or the end of last season. Has that changed in any way for you? And if it has, how?
Yeah, and you're referring to just my thoughts about him from essentially my initial feelings to now. Is that pretty much
You and
what
I
you're...
last year were like, man, it's going to be really crazy when Jamal gets fired and a new head coach comes and takes this team to like the Eastern Conference Finals or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So has that changed at all for you?
I would say yes. But I also would say I'm not shocked if it is another coach taking us to the Eastern Conference Finals. Just because there's things that need to be worked on, and it really does kind of I guess also tie into something else that I was going to talk about, but like what I was going to ask you, and we can tackle that after we kind of address this. But the question was going to be, what kind of conversation do you think we're having about Coach Mosley next year? This time next year, what kind of conversation are we having? And the reason I say that is just because of some of the shortcomings that are really big shortcomings that I don't know that I saw him adjust this year on, like leaving guys in for 15 minutes to finish a game. He seemed to love the answer and the reply of, on multiple occasions where nothing was as egregious as playing them 15 minutes straight, but it was somewhat similar sometimes, talking about, the basically riding the hot hand. But there's to an extent where that hot hand cools off because it's freaking gasping for air,
That you're talking about like sometimes like riding guys too long, like even if they're
yes.
playing well. I feel like that happened like if we said it happened a handful of times this year, I think that would possibly be overstating it. Like I can point to like 3 or 4 occasions for sure where I felt like that happened.
Right. I just feel like next year these games and losses are going to feel way heavier than the losses that we felt this year. And I just think that this is literally losing games. Like at that point next year, every loss hurts. If you have the goals this team has, every loss hurts. You can't have 3 games you lose because of the same mistake. One that seems so obvious. So sorry, I got off there, but like to answer your question, yes, my feelings changed. I would not be as shocked if Jamal Mosley is the guy that takes us to the Eastern Conference Finals in a few years. Is the same sentiment of like, I wouldn't be that shocked if he's not. You know what I mean? Whereas before I was pretty much like 90-10 that Jamal was just going to get this locker room right, grow these guys to be the players that they're going to be, and then he's kind of served his duty and he's out. Now I am just really kind of split of either possibility, honestly.
I think, and I hate that like it always comes back to this because like being a basketball, an NBA head coach is so much more than this. But when your locker room won't let a guy fail, I feel like that goes a long way. Like this team just will not let this guy down is how I feel in a lot of situations. Now, can that change over time? If the players aren't happy and they don't feel like they're getting the results that they want or the team isn't achieving the amount of success that they want, of course that can change. I think I'm kind of at the point where I don't want to put like I've seen enough improvement, I feel like, from one year to the next where it's incredibly obvious that you give a guy more talent, he can do a lot more with that.
Right.
But
And
I just
health.
don't feel comfortable like myself like putting any kind of like ceiling on Jamal Mosley. Now, do I think he's going to be like Eric Spoelstra or like Greg Popovich? Most likely not. I would feel pretty comfortable in betting that he won't kind of reach like I don't know that we'll ever be saying like Jamal Mosley is one of the best like schematic coaches in the league, one of the best strategists. As an NBA
It
head
could
coach
be
in the league,
too
I don't know
early
that
though
we'll
to
ever be
even to
saying
to
that.
really know. To be
I'm sorry.
fair, I said it could be too early. Like we just might not be there where you can even make a prediction like that because obviously those are like the goats of coaching. But I do think that there is a level he could reach that we haven't seen because he's not even seen it. You know what I mean? Like he's still got to get there, and he's got to get more reps. Like these guys aren't the only ones growing at a crazy pace. You think about just like really honestly, I feel like they're on the same path. You can expect from a player for so long that he is going probably the first 4 years of his career that each offseason from one season to the next, you're going to see incredible growth. You hope to see incredible growth. That's kind of my thinking with Mosley. Like he is on the same trajectory as someone like Cole Anthony in terms of you should see crazy growth. Jalen Suggs, you know what I mean? That like I just don't even know that we are even close to reaching the point where he knows what Mosley knows what he himself can do coaching wise.
That's kind of the point that I'm trying to make in like the same vein that I'm confident that like Cole Anthony isn't going to become Steph Curry.
Fair.
Like I'm not saying like bad by any means, but like all time great. Like
Of
usually
course.
you could probably tell pretty early on. Maybe it's not as obvious with coaching, but really the point that I'm trying to make is because of the growth that I feel like he made from year 1 to year 2, like I'm not comfortable saying like, "Oh, I wouldn't even put it at 50-50." Like
Mm.
I'm just really not sure. Like I think it is entirely possible that he can continue to improve at a rate that like 3-4 years from now, like he's the guy coaching us in the Eastern Conference Finals. He's the guy coaching us in like the NBA Finals. Like I do feel like there is a possibility that he grows into that. And again, whether or not that is like him being this like incredible basketball mind and like drawing up like the best, sidelines out of bounds plays or like drawing up the best game plans, or he knows the guys to hire to get on his staff that are going to be able to assist him in doing that. I feel like that is an underrated part of being an NBA head coach. Knowing the guys to bring on your staff, knowing the guys to promote, or knowing a guy on another team somewhere that maybe isn't getting as big of a role as he potentially could, and you kind of hiring them away. Like, you've seen that time and time again where a guy is a video assistant and now he's a offensive coordinator for an NBA team. Like it happens all the time.
Mm.
So whether that is him again growing in to be like this kind of Eric Spoelstra kind of guy, or he's just really good about getting the right guys on the staff and they're kind of a sum of their parts and getting this team where they need to go, I have very much shifted my opinion that like, oh, Jamal is most likely going to be the guy that gets this team to a certain level and then somebody comes in. To now I'm like, no, like he really might be able to grow into the guy that takes us all the way. And how awesome would that be? Like
Mm.
you just don't really see that a ton where a guy comes in with a super young team and then brings them like all the way to the pinnacle of success and wins a title.
Yeah.
Like look, like I think Nick Nurse. Well, maybe not even Nick Nurse. I'm sorry, Dwayne Casey. Dwayne Casey got that team pretty far along. But like if we look at like Brad Stevens, came into the Celtics and the Celtics were kind of rebuilding. You get Jason Tatum, you get Jaylen Brown. They go to the Eastern Conference Finals. And then, now he's in a much different role. But like that's probably like, if I'm thinking about it, that's like the closest that we've seen it. Like,
Mm.
I mean, Eric Spoelstra, the Heat weren't very good, but then all of a sudden they get LeBron James and Chris Bosh and, they win multiple titles. But
Yeah.
it's just like, it's not very often that you see a coach kind of start the rebuild and see it all the way through. And to me, that would just be like the best story ever.
Yeah, for sure. I think if Mosley's not the guy, then you can probably kiss goodbye the like emotional hugs, just player to player moments as well, where Jamal is talking to a player. Jalen Suggs, I don't remember if I talked about it with you. It might have been with Kevin.
The Warriors
Jalen
game.
Suggs, going over, embracing, putting his
Kevin.
head.
I was listening,
putting
but
his
it was Kevin.
Yeah, there you go. Putting his head in the chest of Jamal Mosley, like just those type of moments will be really cool to see on a bigger stage. You know what I mean? Because very much this team is a bunch of kids, and Jamal Mosley is I don't know if they would call him a mentor, a father figure type person either. Like I don't know what the dynamic or how they would label it, but getting to see them grow together and get to that point would be awesome. It would be a whole lot sweeter than Jamal Mosley being shown the door in a couple seasons when the front office is like, all right, thanks. We've kind of maxed out. We know what these players are going to be. We don't need chemistry anymore. It's through the roof. Thanks for what you did. Bring in another guy. You know what I mean? It would be a whole lot sweeter if you could, do this whole run with Jamal at the helm. I hope that he coaches his way there. I hope that he, leaves no doubt that he is the coach for it, because that would lead to some really special moments, obviously.
Well, there are some people that believe, chemistry is overrated. Like Steve Clifford used to say, chemistry is as good as your record.
Right.
If you're winning a lot of games, guys are in the locker room, everybody's happy, everybody's getting along. If you're losing games, it's really easy for that to change.
Yeah.
So who knows how much, like once you get to a certain level of winning, some teams just end up plateauing. It doesn't might not get worse, but some teams are just
right.
They're the 4th seed and they make it to the second round 3 years in a row. And it's like, okay, we're at like a proverbial ceiling and we need to bring a new voice kind of into the locker room. I hope that doesn't happen with Jamal Mosley. I do think it would be a incredible story. And at this point, like for me, kind of like I stopped expecting or putting a ceiling on a guy like Franz Wagner. Right now, I don't want to put a ceiling on Jamal Mosley because he showed me a lot more growth in year 2 than I thought we would see. Like even you talked about the timeouts earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Super frustrating to start the season. But as the season went on, you saw him calling those kind of like momentum stopping timeouts. Not always, but that was something in year 1 that we did not see at all. Mm-hmm. And maybe it was just kind of like a comfortability thing. Like you're kind of in over your head that first year and you're just kind of keeping your head above water. And now that you're more confident, you're able to see in and out of those situations and what is the right decision to make during the game. I think that's going to be his kind of next thing is like, if things aren't working in the middle of the game, which we did see, he would get away from the zone in certain aspects. But as you start to get into, playoff contention and stuff like that, like adjusting your lineup to attack certain matchups and things like that, that's going to be, I think, kind of like the next level of growth for Jamal Mosley, and really looking forward to it and super happy that guy is our head coach. And I do hope he's able to see it all the way through.
Yeah. And we do know as well, Jonathan, as far as his contract, for those of you that might not know, he's got through the 25-26 season essentially with this team. All I know is when I think about coaches that just didn't make it past the contract and, picking up options, I think of teams like and coaches like the Houston Rockets with like Steven Silas. That they didn't pick up his option. And I just think that like it's a huge accomplishment even to make it through a couple of years with an organization, because it is very difficult. You look at Houston, and at their time they went 17-55, they went 20-62. This year they go 22-60. Just very thankful we're not the Houston Rockets, and that we've got Jamal Mosley and the right talent. You land the luck with the number 1 pick, and I just hope that Mosley builds enough case for himself that in a couple of years, when it comes time for them to keep a extended contract to him again, that they do that instead of just parting ways. Because like you said, teams plateau, and we just hope that he continues on the trajectory upward.
Let's shift gears now and talk a little bit more about the NBA draft lottery. Again, I'm going to keep harping on this. Coming up on May 16th at 7 o'clock, we're going to be at the Wall Street Plaza in downtown Orlando for the NBA draft lottery watch party with the Orlando Magic and Michelob Ultra. If you're on YouTube, you can find the RSVP link in the description. Same if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can find the RSVP link in this episode's details there. So make sure that you RSVP. We have over 450 RSVPs now. All of last year, we had 111 So more than 4 times as many RSVPs this year. So
Crazy.
it's going to be incredible. We really can't wait for it. But Luke, pulling up tankathon.com on every episode, we go through and we simulate the NBA draft lottery. Been doing this really every day. It's been about a week, I think, since I've got the number 1 overall pick. But right now, if you need a reminder, the Magic have the 6th best odds in this year's draft lottery. They have a 37.2% chance of jumping up into the top 4. They have a 9% chance of the number 1 overall pick in general. They do own the Chicago Bulls first-round pick this year. They do own that. Unless Chicago is able to jump up into the top 4. Right now, the Bulls have an 8.5% chance of ending up in the top 4 and a 1.8% chance of ending up with the number 1 overall pick. Luke, how do you feel about like the way that you've been seeing these odds and these simulations unravel so far, 15 days out from the lottery?
Well, I mean, listen, we've lucked into some number 1 overall picks. We've also dropped some spots. I don't know, man. I mean, like I told you today, bro, we're getting 6 and 11, and then we'll make it. You know what I mean? I just don't. I don't. You know, I'm there to see what happens, but I'm just basking in the fact that it. I don't. I don't know. I don't know that I don't know that I don't care is the right sentiment.
It's not the right word. And let me tell you why. Because this is for everybody out there that feels the way that Luke feels. 6-11 is fine. You're right. If we get 6 and 11, it's not the end of the world. But the fact that it is still entirely incredibly possible that the Magic get the number 1 overall pick, I cannot help but have that gleam and excitement in my eye until Mark Tatum shoves the knife into my heart and tells me
listen,
that we're 6-11.
you're the wrong person for your team to get the number 1 pick, because the year before that you woke up irrationally feeling like this team was going to get the number 1 pick, and then we get the 5th. But then your dreams became reality the next year, and you realized your dream was just about a year behind. So listen, you're eternally optimistic, and I love that about you. But I just, if they say the Bulls show up at 11, the Magic show up at 6, I'd be like, all right, great. Then we hang out a little bit more, and then that's it. I don't know.
I will be like, all right, great, but I still am just going to let myself get nervous and have that kind of like nervous excitement leading up to the draft. Because if we're not there at 6 or 5 or 4 or 3 or 2, it's going to be one of the best nights of my life.
I just feel like you're going to have some disappointment when we're 6
probably, and I'm fine with that.
That's just personality difference.
The way that I live my life, let's let it roll.
I know.
All right, let's hit the tankathon and see what happens. And the Magic end up with the 4th pick and the 11th pick. I'm totally good with that. I love that.
You know what tankathon should do? Tankathon's great for this, right? You click the button, whatever. It serves its purpose. I wish that tankathon would have the feature to where once you hit the sim lottery button, it starts from the bottom like the actual lottery, and they unveil names, and you have that option. You can fast forward through it if you want. There's like a fast forward option in this scenario, but I feel like that would make this experience a lot more fun. You know what I mean?
I like that idea. Do you want me to start that way? I can do that for you when we do this.
You tell me. Oh, you act as the feature. I hear you.
Yeah, I could do
maybe,
that.
but it'd be much more fun if it was just like, you read it off. You're like, that, you know what I mean? Like you read it off, but you're also getting it in real time.
I'll do my best Mark Tatum impression next time we do this.
Okay, cool. And then in the meantime, I'll DM Tankathon on Twitter, see if they can do that for us. Small favors.
For a site that has done as much as they already have with like algorithms and whatnot, that seems like a pretty small lift. So, but yeah, we'll put the word out to Tankathon and kind of see what happens there. But
perfect,
Luke, I think that is going to do it for us. Unless you have any last thoughts on Mosley or Tankathon or anything else.
No, I have no thoughts. We only have a few more episodes up to this point until we see you guys and all your beautiful faces at Wall Street. So can't wait for it.
2, 3, 4, 5 more episodes actually.
That's a lot more than I.
Yeah, that's definitely a lot more than I would have said. But yeah, folks, again, coming up on May 16th, it is a Tuesday night. Make sure you are clearing your calendars. Starting at 7 o'clock, we will be at the Wall Street Plaza, downtown Orlando, partnering with the Orlando Magic and Michelob Ultra for the NBA Draft Lottery watch party. We're also going to be giving away a Paolo Banchero autographed basketball to one lucky attendee, and then we'll be recording a live episode after the NBA Draft Lottery, just kind of recapping it. And at that time, we'll probably be able to talk a bit more about the prospects that we would like at number 1 or number 2 or any of the 2 picks. Hopefully we have 2 picks at that point and we keep that Bulls pick. But again, folks, May 16th, 7 o'clock at the Wall Street Plaza, downtown Orlando. We will see you there. But for Luke Sylvia, this has been Jonathan Osborne. You guys have been listening to The Sixth Man Show, and we will catch you guys next time. See ya.
Thanks for listening to The Sixth Man Show. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and Spotify to get new episodes downloaded directly to your phone. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to give us a 5-star rating and a review. It helps out the show a lot. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Sixth Man Show. We'll catch you guys next time. Go Magic!